Maximizing your new tool, the Iowa assessments. In Zechariah chapter 2 and verse 1 it says, I lifted up mine eyes again and looked, and behold a man with a measuring line in his hand. Obviously Zechariah was not talking about the Iowa assessments. Zechariah was talking about rebuilding the city of Jerusalem. And the thing that caught my eye was a man with a measuring line in his hand. Any builder needs to check the progress of his work with a ruler and a level and a plumb line. As educators, we need to measure the progress of our students. A measurement is an observation that quantitatively reduces uncertainty. A measurement tells us more than we knew before. A quote that I found says this, one accurate measurement is worth 1,000 expert opinions. So the primary benefit to you and your school of the Iowa assessments is the fact that you're going to be able to measure your students' progress. It's beneficial for us as educators to have an objective picture of how a child is progressing in school from year to year. A well-designed standardized test like the Iowa assessments offers a relatively affordable and efficient way of measuring the achievement of a large number of students. However, caution must be exercised when using the scores from any standardized test. Some schools, perhaps from a lack of any knowledge at all, simply take their score reports and file them in the student permanent record folder and they just sit there. Other schools, with perhaps a little knowledge, are in danger of misinterpreting the scores or using the scores in ways that a particular score was never intended to be used. All scores that you receive provide some or have some value, but some provide greater insight than others. Therefore, understanding the different scores will help you use the information that you gain most effectively. Now let's talk about the Iowa assessments. A school may choose the reports produced. Now, I hope you're aware by now that with the Iowa assessments, unlike achievement testing in the past, the publisher of the test will not send you any paper reports. You will have the ability, and we'll talk about that later, but the ability to print those reports yourself in your school. There are any number, I don't know how many there are, but there's many reports that you can print. You're welcome to print as many as you would like. If you have some, would have some use to you. But there are two that we recommend in particular. The first one is called the profile narrative. The profile narrative is an effective report for talking with parents about their students, their children's individual scores. The report is 8.5 by 11, and half of the page is taken up with interpretive information to help you understand the score and explain the scores to your parents. If you're going to talk to your parents about the achievement testing scores, I would encourage you to create a vocabulary sheet, if you will, for the terms that you're going to be using. Many of the terms we'll talk about today. Number one, you'll make sure you know what those individual terms mean so you can explain them to the parents. And if you want to, you could even copy them and give them to the parents as well. This is what the profile narrative looks like. Now, this is the profile narrative for an actual student. We didn't create any ringers to make anybody or anything look good. So that's why all the identifying information for the student has been blacked out at the top of the form. This young man is an 8th grader, or was last spring. He took the Iowa assessments last spring. He was an 8th grader. And here's that interpretive information I mentioned a moment ago to help you understand the scores and explain the scores to the parents. The second form that we recommend in particular is called the performance profile. This displays the individual test scores across the top and what are called domain scores across the bottom. We'll talk more about those domain scores in a few moments. This form also has interpretive information, but not as much as the profile narrative does. There's the interpretive information. Here's this young man, same young man, his scores, and here are those domain scores that I said we're going to talk about before we get too far into the workshop. In addition to choosing the reports that may be produced, you as a school can also choose the scores that are reported. There are a total of 9 scores available. You may choose 5 of those scores. Two of those scores, or two of the 9, are called local scores. And the local scores will compare your students' achievement to the achievement of other students who are using the A.C.E. program who took the test at the same time that your students did. However, if you choose those local scores, you will have to wait until the closing of the testing window, which is late spring, almost May, and then you'll have to wait for all of the schools using A.C.E. that administered the Iowa assessments to submit their tests for scoring, and then wait for those tests to be scored and the scores tabulated before you can have access to those scores. The only downside of that is you'll have to wait significantly longer to get your scores if you use the local scores, but that's a decision you can make. Then there's two other scores. One is called a Lexile score, which is a reading score, and the other one is called a quantile score, which is a mathematics score. We don't recommend that you bother with those scores because both of those scores will direct both you as educators and parents to materials that are contrary to your Christian philosophy of education. You can do it if you want, but I don't think they would have much use for you. So, of the 9, that's 4, we're going to talk about 5 scores in particular. The first one of those is called a standard score. This is useful for comparing student performance over time, specifically from one year to the next. In essence, if this year's standard score is higher than last year's standard score, then growth has occurred in that student's academic achievement. This is a very valuable score, the standard score, for monitoring or measuring growth in your students. Second score we want to talk about is called the National Percentile Rank, or many times just the percentile. This is probably the most useful and readily understood score. It compares the score of an individual student with the students in the reference or norming group in the same grade who took the same test at about the same time in the school year. Percentile ranks range from a low of 1 to a high of 99, 50 being average. The 50th percentile is considered average. Percentiles do not represent actual amounts of a child's knowledge, but indicate the percentage of the reference group obtaining scores equal to or less than that particular score. For example, if you had a student who scored at the 75th percentile, that would be pretty good. If that student scored at the 75th percentile, that means that student's scores are equal to or higher than 75% of the students who took the test at the same time during the school year. Okay? A good way to explain, and you would have access to this information, to explain that to parents, they may not understand that readily, is you've heard of the traditional bell curve. Okay, you show them a bell curve in the middle, at the highest point in the bell, that's the 50th percentile. So you can show them, your child scored at the 75th, so they're halfway on this side. That sometimes is more beneficial for them to see it on the bell curve than to try to explain it to them. A percentile does not mean that the child answered 75% of the questions correctly, like on a PACE test. Although 75% on a PACE test is nothing to write home about. Nor does it mean that the student has learned 75% of the skills taught. Again, it simply means that that score is equal to or greater than 75% of the students who took the test at the same time. The next score we want to talk about is called the National Stay Nines, or again, more commonly just Stay Nines. Stay Nines are derived directly from the percentile ranks, but they are less precise. Like percentile ranks, Stay Nines can be used to compare one subject area to another. Using percentiles or Stay Nines, you can compare a reading score and a math score, one to the other. That's a legitimate comparison. Stay Nines range from a low of 1 to a high of 9, with 5 being considered average. Stay Nines 1, 2, and 3 are below average. Stay Nines 4, 5, and 6 are average. And Stay Nines 7, 8, and 9 are above average. Next score, grade equivalence. A.C.E. educators traditionally or historically have gravitated toward grade equivalence. However, grade equivalents are often misinterpreted or overinterpreted and should be viewed only as a general indicator of a child's performance. A grade equivalent shows the grade placement of a student for whom a particular score would be typical. Grade equivalents range from K.0, which is the beginning of kindergarten, to 12.9, which is the end of the 12th grade. Scores below K, or below kindergarten, are designated by the letter P, as in Paul, meaning pre-kindergarten, and scores above 12.9 are indicated by the number 13, followed by a plus sign, which means post-high school or beyond the range of that test. In a grade equivalent, let's use 12.9 as an example. In a grade equivalent, the number to the left of the decimal indicates the number or the year in school, so it's the 12th grade. The number to the right of the decimal indicates 1/10 of a school year or one school month. So that's the 9th month of the 12th grade. So 12.9 is the 9th month of the 12th grade. Now, let me give you an example. If a 4th grade student completed a test designed for 4th graders and received a grade equivalent of 6.3, that does not mean that 4th grade student has mastered 6th grade work. Rather, that student's score corresponds to the typical scores of a 6th grade student in the 3rd month of the school year if that 6th grade student took the 4th grade test. Okay? Grade equivalent 6.3. If the 6th grader took the 4th grade test in the 3rd month of the school year, he would get a grade equivalent of 6.3 on that 4th grade test. That's all that means. For me personally, this is one of my least favorite scores. It has value, it has use, and you can do some research yourself. I'll tell you where, that can help you use the grade equivalents, but you need to approach them with a degree of respect. And then the last one we want to talk about is called the National Percentile Rank Graph. It's now all 5 of these scores we just talked about appear on both the profile narrative and the performance profile, the 2 forms we looked at the beginning. The National Percentile Rank Graph provides a graphic overview of a student's performance across the various content areas. By comparing any 2 bands on this National Percentile Rank Graph, you can compare how a student did in one area with how they did in another area. Now, I showed you that performance profile, the whole form, at the beginning. So you make it big enough for you to be able to see anything. I have taken and cut that upper left-hand corner out of that form. Now this is the same 8th grade student we talked about earlier. Here are his standard scores. Here are his percentile ranks, his grade equivalents, and his stanines. Now these percentile ranks have been displayed over here as a bar graph. And again, this is helpful for parents to see because the numbers don't mean as much, but it's easy to see that this young man scored higher in written expression than he did in vocabulary, for example. It makes comparison easier. Now those are the 5 scores, and you add in the 2 local scores and the Lexile and the quantile. That's the 9 scores available to you. And you have choices there. There are also other scores that you get automatically. One of those is called grade level benchmarks. Now these grade level benchmarks will appear on the lower right hand corner of the performance profile. I'll show you where they are in just a moment. Grade level benchmarks are indicators that show whether a student is on track or not yet on track in terms of being ready for college based on their scores on the Iowa assessments. The target for college readiness is that level of achievement where a student is ready to enroll and succeed in college freshman courses. We'll talk more about those in a moment. Let me tell you about this other one that you get automatically. And they are predicted ACT, American College Test, and SAT, Scholastic Aptitude Test, the college boards. These predicted ACT, SAT scores are the range of scores that the student can be expected to receive on the ACT composite score and on the SAT math and the SAT reading scores based on their scores on this administration of the Iowa assessment. Now, grade level benchmarks and their predicted A.C.E, SAT scores are available from the 6th grade up. They have no application for elementary age children. So from 6th through 12th grade, you'll receive both grade level benchmarks and the predicted A.C.E, SAT scores. Again, I cut out, this is that whole bottom of that form is domain scores. These are the upper right hand corner of that form, again, so we can see it. Grade level benchmarks, it's the same young man. In reading, he's not yet on track for college level work. Language and mathematics, he is on track. And science, he's not yet on track. Now, this is an 8th grade student. He's got his whole high school career in front of him yet. So these are going to change. Now down here, the predicted A.C.E, SAT scores, based on his scores on this administration of the Iowa assessments, this young man should score between 20 and 25 on the A.C.E composite score, between 390 and 510 on the SAT reading, and between 460 and 590 on the SAT math. These are tools for you, but they're only one tool. We'll talk more about this in a moment. You know the child, you know the student, you know their learning center, the work in the learning center, you know their family. This is just a piece of information that you put into the whole picture. You would never want to tell a child or their family that they should or should not do something based on a single piece of information. Don't pigeonhole a child. Now, you would never want to say, well, I don't think you should consider continuing education for your child because they're not on track in reading and science. No, he's only 8th grade. I want to use my brother-in-law as an example, Mrs. Dawson's older brother. He's a year and a half older than she is. When he was in elementary school, Lewis had a little bit of trouble learning how to read. The teacher wanted to put him in special ed. Mom, Mrs. Dawson's mother, said, not on your life, buddy. So she got a tutor. Lewis graduated from high school, got a bachelor's of science degree in accounting, got a master's of business administration degree, and a law degree. I think he learned how to read. So that's my point. You don't want to pigeonhole a child on a single piece of information, but it's a valuable tool in advising the child and their parents. Okay. Then on the bottom of that performance narrative are those domains that I mentioned and another score called cognitive levels. The domains are simply areas of knowledge that were tested. That's all the domains are, areas of knowledge that were tested. And the cognitive levels are simply critical thinking skills that were tested. This portion of the report provides additional information about a student's strengths and weaknesses in each test. So again, I've cut out that part of this is the upper left-hand corner or the bottom of the page. Here are the domains. Here's the reading test, okay? Here are the domains or the areas of knowledge that were tested on the reading test. That's all domains are, areas of knowledge. Here are the cognitive levels or the critical thinking skills that were tested. Essential competencies, conceptual understanding, and so forth. Now, obviously, the domains are going to change in each test. You can see a part of the written expression test down here, and the domains are different. Because they're areas of knowledge, so on each part of the test, the areas of knowledge that were tested are going to change. However, in each part of the test, the cognitive levels are the same. The critical thinking skills remain the same for each part of the test. So you can't see it because it'll be down here somewhere, but the cognitive levels on the written expression part of the test are going to be those same three, essential competencies, and so forth. Now, here's what I really want to draw your attention to, this DIFF column over here. Obviously, DIFF means difference. This is the difference between the student's percent correct and the average percent correct for students in this grade throughout the nation. A negative value in the DIFF column means that a student score is lower than the national average of percent of correct answers. A positive value means the score is higher than the national average. So this young man, again, the same 8th grader, On the informational reading, the national average of percent of correct answers is 66%. He got 80% of those answers correct, so his difference is a positive 14. On his literary reading, the national average is 74% of the answers correct. He got them all right, so his difference is a positive 26. Okay? Now this can be very helpful for you. The difference values are also graphed as bars in the area labeled differences over here on this side. So there's that positive 14. It's right there, and there's a positive 26. Bars to the left of the center line are negative values. Bars to the right are positive values. The varying direction and lengths of these bars make it easy to identify skills that may represent the student's stronger or weaker areas of performance compared with students in the nation. When the difference is larger than 20, a plus sign or a minus sign appears at the end of the bar. So since that was a positive 26, it's got a plus sign there at the end. Now here's how you can use this information as a supervisor. Obviously, this young man has a weakness in vocabulary. Now, if you looked at there's only one, this part. He has a few others that are on the negative side, but not very many. As we'll see, this is a pretty bright young man. Now, you probably already knew that he had a weakness in vocabulary, but here's proof that he does. So, you as a supervisor can choose to do some things to help minimize that weakness, maybe even turn it into a strength. If he's not already in Readmaster would be a good thing for him to do because it's a great vocabulary builder. If he's in Readmaster already once a week, maybe you can squeeze him in there a second time during the week. Or if he reading his literature books, you could require him, whenever he comes to a word that he doesn't know, he has to look it up in the dictionary and write it in a notebook. Now that would be very difficult for you to monitor. However, even if he only did it part of the time, enough to keep something in the notebook to keep you off his back, it's going to help. So whatever you come up with, this identifies area of weakness that you can work on with that young man. So that's a very powerful tool for you. Another score is very helpful for you is the predicted national percentile rank. This is very helpful in knowing what to expect from a student. This is the national percentile rank that a student can be expected to receive on the IO assessments based on their performance on the COGAT, the Cognitive Abilities Test. Now, obviously, this predicted national percentile rank is only available when the IO assessments and the COGAT are administered together. We recommend you do the COGAT and the IO assessments together to 2nd, 5th, and 8th grades. So you would only get this predicted national percentile rank at those 3 times. These scores appear on the profile narrative. There's the whole profile narrative. That's the same one we looked at the beginning. Again, we're going to take a look at this corner up here for this same 8th grade young man. Here are he took the IO assessments and the COGAT together. Here are his predicted national percentile ranks. Remember, that's the national percentile he should get on the IO assessments based on his scores on the COGAT. Let's look at his complete composite. His predicted national percentile rank is the 69th percentile. Based on what he did on the COGAT, he should score at the 69th percentile on the IO assessment. Let's look at what he did. He scored at the 69th percentile. Right on the money. As we'll see later as we go through this, this is a very consistent young man. Now, how does that help you? Well, if you were this young man's supervisor, he's performing up to his level of ability. You can't expect a whole lot more from him than he's already producing. However, if you had the predicted national percentile rank was 69 and the actual one was 45, you would know they're not performing up to the level of ability. And as a supervisor, you could push harder. And when they whined and complained and went home to mommy and daddy and said, they're making me work too hard, you could show mom and dad, look, this is what he should be doing based on his ability, and he's not doing it. So it gives you another tool in setting reasonable expectations for each of the children. Okay. That's the IO assessments. Let's talk about the COGAT, the Cognitive Abilities Test. There are scores available on the COGAT for all 3 batteries, the verbal, nonverbal, and quantitative batteries. Those are the three batteries of the COGAT. All these scores appear on a form called the COGAT profile narrative, and we'll look at that in just a minute. You will receive scores on the COGAT that are based on age. Your student's ability will be compared to other students the same age. The first one of those scores is called the standard age score. This compares a student's performance with that of other students, as I said, who are of the same age or were when they took the test. The average standard age score is 100. The standard age score is not. It is not an IQ. However, the standard age score correlates very highly to an IQ. It's not an IQ, but it's IQ second cousin, okay? The average is 100. So the standard age score is very helpful in comparing the ability of students the same age, again, in setting reasonable expectations for a student. If you had a student whose standard age score was 125, that's well above normal, or not normal, average, well above average, then you would know as a supervisor, if they weren't producing in the learning center, you would know they have the ability, and again, you can push a little harder, give them more subjects or increase their daily goals, or whatever it is you might want to do. But flip side, if you had a student whose standard age score was 85, which is a little below average, then you would know that you couldn't push as hard for that child. You wouldn't set as high of an expectation for that child because you obviously know from the score that they don't have the ability. Very useful score. You also receive age stay nines, just like the other stay nines, low of 1, high of 9, 5 is average, but it's comparing them to students the same age. You'll receive age percentile ranks, just like the other percentile ranks, low of 1, high of 99, 50 is average. And then again, those percentile ranks will be displayed as a bar graph to make it more easy to compare one score to another. In addition to scores based on age, you will get scores based on grade. So this time your students on these scores are compared to other students in the same grade. You will receive grade stay nines. Again, low of 1, high of 9, average is 5. You'll receive grade percentile ranks, just like all the other percentile ranks. And then you will, for the COGAT, you will receive what is called a composite score, which is a total score. It provides the average of a student's scores on all three of the COGAT batteries, verbal, nonverbal, and quantitative. Here is what the COGAT profile narrative looks like. Very similar to the other one, except it has the COGAT logo up here in the corner. And again, interpretive information for you to explain to parents. Now I'm going to look at this corner up here, but before I do that, I want to point out this paragraph down here on the bottom left side. We're going to look at that in just a moment. So here are this student, same 8th grader. Here are his age scores up here, his standard age scores, his age stay nines, his age percentile ranks, and then the percentile ranks displayed as a bar graph. Here's the three batteries, or the lighter color, and the composite or total score is the black bar. Look at this young man's standard age score. It's 110. So he's a bit above average, and that fits in line with everything else we've seen about this young man. Scoring rate where he should be on the predicted national percentile rank. Here are your grade scores down here for the same young man. There's your grade stay nines and your grade percentile ranks. Now there's one other score that you would get with the COGAT called the ability profile. Now, if you don't intend to get my notes, that's entirely up to you. But if you don't get my notes, I would encourage you to write down this website, www.cogat.com. The ability profile shows the overall magnitude of a student's scores on the COGAT and the pattern of that student's scores, which indicates whether some of that student's scores are significantly higher or lower than the other scores. Now, that paragraph I showed you that was on the bottom left, this is that same paragraph for this same young man. Here is his ability profile right there. Now, that is a relatively, if I can say it, simple ability profile, because based on everything else we've seen, this is a very consistent young man. He doesn't have big variations in his scores or between his ability and his achievement. For other children, you will see what look like much more complex ability profiles. They'll be longer and they'll even look like fractions in them. And when the more complex the ability profile is, the more that student scores. Some are way higher than others or way lower than others. The advantage of that website, www.cogat.com, you go to that website and the form will appear where you will be able to enter the various parts. There'll be a place to put the 7, the B, and the V followed by the negative sign. But even if you had a much more complex ability profile, there'll be places for you to put all that information in. Then the website will interpret the ability profile for you, and you'll be able to print it. That's much more effective for you than me trying to explain it all to you this morning, and you wouldn't remember anyway because you got home and actually tried to do it. You'll have it right in front of you. So that's the ability profile. We've looked at the Iowa assessments. We've looked at the COGAT. Let's look at the factors that should be kept in mind when you're looking at your test results. You want to keep your scores in proper perspective. They provide a snapshot. If I took my phone and took a picture of who's in this room right now, that would be a snapshot. In a half an hour, there's going to be different people in here. That's all scores are. Achievement and ability tests are only one measure of a student's academic progress. My brother-in-law, one measure. Valuable, but it's still only one. You don't pigeonhole them based on one piece of information. You should not expect to discover something new and different about every student every time they take the Iowa assessments. Most student scores will fall into a regular pattern. Now you want to see progress, you want to see growth, but it's unlikely that a score is going to go way high or way low from one year to the next. If they do, there's probably something else going on, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So when you're looking at your achievement test scores, most of the time, no news is good news. You don't want to put too much weight on 1 year's scores. If you use the Stanford 10 before you use the Iowa assessments, you cannot compare a Stanford 10 score to an Iowa assessment score. They're both achievement tests, and they have some similarities, but they're different tests. So you can't look at the Stanford 10, look at the Iowa, and draw any conclusions at all. One's an apple and one's a kumquat. You can't tell much from 1 year's administration of the Iowa assessments. Now you can gather some information, but if I only have 1 year, I have the tip end of a tape measure. I can't measure much with a tip end of a tape measure. I need a 25-foot tape measure and 2 points to measure. So you need at least 2 years of Iowa assessment scores to compare in order to be able to measure much. So you don't put too much weight on 1 year's scores. The scores should not be viewed in isolation, and especially if it's the first year. Now, my next point may be too late for some of you. Don't panic if scores are lower than hoped. The Stanford 10, you had some latitude in the timing of the test. The Iowa assessments are a timed test. If it says you have 12, or they have 12 minutes to take this part of the test, that's all they get, 12 minutes. If you want the most accurate and useful scores, you must stay within the timing guidelines for each part of the test. On the days of the test, I would encourage you to document, and by document I mean write down, any indication that a child is upset, ill, panicked, or distracted when taking the test. This information will be useful in interpreting that student's scores. On the day of the test, they come in, they're there, they're in school, but you know they're not feeling 100%. Or they're there, and the night before their pet cat or pet dog or something was hit by a car. Those kinds of things that would affect a child, you write it down. So when you get the scores later, you'll remember that that was going on in the child's life, because those things could very well affect their ability to take the test. When you administer the test, the Iowa assessments and the COGAT, whether you do paper and pencil or online, and you can do either one or a combination of the two, but either way, before you submit those tests for scoring, you want to check the identifying information on the answer documents, especially if you had the children do it. But even if you had an adult do it for each child, you still want to check it. This is where you write the numbers or letters in little boxes and you fill in the circles underneath. What's in those boxes doesn't count for anything. The machine's going to read what's bubbled in underneath. So you want to make sure that's what bubbled in is accurate. Because if the child's age or grade is bubbled in incorrectly, it's going to affect the scores because they're going to be compared to the wrong group of children. You want to make sure your school's identifying number is bubbled in correctly, so your scores don't get set to Cucamonga or someplace. I mean, you'll still be able to find them, but it will take you longer. So you want to check all that information on both paper and pencil or the online version of the test. You need to realize that some students simply don't test well. They do okay on their PACE test because they do that a couple, 3 times a week. But this kind of test, some of them will freeze up. They'll panic. And that could affect their scores. So you need to take that into account. Now, this is going to rub your feathers wrong, some of you. The Iowa test, Iowa assessments, is an age-based test. The test level assigned to a child must be the test for their chronological age, not their performance level. We do so much with performance level, but this test must be assigned based on their chronological age. If you have a child whose age and their performance level are significantly different, you might consider not even giving them the Iowa assessments. You would gain some information, but it won't be as valuable. But if you're going to give them the Iowa assessments, it has to be the one based on their chronological age. And you need to be aware of the fact, and this has been the case historically, that our curriculum, especially at the lower elementary levels, especially in math, we introduce some concepts at a different time than other curricula do. So for your second and third level, they may be tested on a concept that they haven't been taught yet, which would affect their scores. But that's not a matter of concern, or should not be a matter of concern, because as they progress through the curriculum, they'll more than make up for that. But the second and third level guys, it may affect their scores. And then you need to realize that all scores on any kind of standardized test, they are statistics. And statistics have a margin of error. A poll, 67% of the people said this. And then they'll often say this poll has a margin of error of plus or minus 3 points. Well, that means the actual number could be as low as 64 or as high as 70. The same is true on these scores. So you will see scores that will have a little rectangle around the score. That's called a confidence band. And what that means is, if the same student took the same test a second time, they probably wouldn't get exactly the same scores. But their scores the second time would fall within that little rectangle there, the confidence band. Okay, looking at the scores, watch for the unusual, the big spikes up or big spikes down. There's a cause for those, so if that happens, you want to investigate. Don't overemphasize small differences. Now, you want to see progress from one year to the next, but because of that margin of error, small differences usually are not statistically significant. Don't try to make a score say something it can't. We want to avoid overinterpretation of the score or misinterpretation of the score. Like I said, grade equivalent, sometimes we do. How can the test results be used? Well, as we said already many times, to map and document academic progress of your students. It's the primary purpose. But will also help you identify the gifted student or the slow learner. You probably won't do much with that information other than, as we said, setting reasonable expectations for the student. If they are above average or below average, you know what to expect from them. It will help you address skill weaknesses, like that young man's vocabulary we talked about. And it will help you keep your parents informed as to the progress of their students. Is there help available to interpret the test scores? An immense amount of information to help you. There are several resources available in what is called Data Manager, which is provided by the test publisher. As a matter of fact, once you register for the Iowa assessments, everything you do is going to be in Data Manager. You're going to submit your your test there. You're going to go there for your reports. You're going to go there for your scores, and so forth. Once you register for the test, the first time you'll be assigned a username and password for Data Manager. At some point, if you've not done so already, I would encourage you to log into Data Manager. In the upper left-hand corner, there's a link for digital resources. Click on that link and just go wander around in there and find out what's there to familiarize yourself with it, with that information. Two things I want to point out to you in particular that are available in Data Manager. One of those is there are score interpretation guides for the various levels of the test. These are PDF documents, so you can print them if you want to, but they're pretty hefty documents, 150, 160 pages. But they're PDFs, so you can, if you want to print page 32 to 75, you can do that as well. Or you can just read the information online. But they are in color, so if you do decide to print any part of them, you might want to set your printer to grayscale so you don't suck up all your toner or your ink with the color printing. But they will have information, in being quite honest, they'll have more information than you'll probably want, but they'll have information that you need there to help you interpret the scores. There are also scoring overview videos. These are videos of a person doing kind of what I'm doing this morning, but in much smaller pieces. They'll be talking and have a PowerPoint and talk about the various kinds of scores. Here's the benefit. They're a video. You can pause it. Can't pause me. You can pause it if you're taking notes. You can rewind it. You can watch it 3 times if you want to. Very helpful to you. And then there's A.C.E. customer service. Here is an email address. Some of our customer service representatives have been specifically trained in all things Iowa. They've been in on it from the very beginning of the process. So they can help you register for the test. They can help you log in. They can help you administer the test. They can help you interpret the scores, print your scores, interpret the results, anything. So if you call A.C.E. and you say you need to speak to someone about the Iowa, they'll give you to one of those people who knows all about the Iowa.